There we go. We are now recording. So, yeah, let's make a start then. So, hi, everybody, and welcome to the December edition of the Welsh Azure user group. Thank you all for joining so far, and no doubt there'll be a few more people joining in as I get through my initial welcome and preamble message. So, yes, it's 11th of December, and it is now 6:30 p.m. GMT. So, we're going to kick off our session for this evening. So, as always, big hello from myself, John Lunn, and my good friend and colleague, Mr. Fatunka. We are the remaining few of the Welsh Azure user group. Once upon a time, there was a horde of us all organising these sessions, and we are the remaining two, which is fair to say it's not that difficult these days to organise a virtual meetup. So we're always thankful to all the speakers that come and give up their time more than anything. But look, if you do want to get involved, if you've got any ideas, if you want to speak anything along those lines, we're here to listen to whatever it is that you'd like to do. Please do reach out to either of us. There's our LinkedIn URLs there, and still haven't changed that logo from Twitter to X, but you get the idea. We're all available if you want to reach out and say hello with any of that good stuff. Quick run through of the housekeeping rules. It's hopefully a lot of the folks on these calls have been on these sessions before, but should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Please, everybody, please do be courteous to each other. If you've got a question, there is no such thing as a silly or stupid question. That's exactly what we're here to do. We're here to learn. We've got another two speakers joining us tonight that are imparting their knowledge, and I'm sure they would absolutely love whatever question you've got related, as long as it's related to their session, of course. We can't help with everything, but please do use the chat facility below and stay on mute if you can, unless you're invited to come off and speak, because sometimes it can be a little bit off-putting if you've, knocking around and your microphone is on not on mute. Like I say, use the chat window. We've all got access to the chat session down there. And we'll leave it up to the speaker if they want to review that chat facility as they talk, or maybe there's a little bit of a Q&A session at the end. We'll let the speakers decide how they want to do that. We've got a quiz as per usual, the infamous, or the famous, I should say, Quizar, that I always like to big up, that Mr. Fatunka has developed, and there are sessions on that if you want to go back through the back catalogue. We'll be hosting that quiz after John's session, so after the second speaker John has been on, only 10-15 minutes or so, quick quiz with some actual prizes to be won. Most importantly, though, be interactive. Make sure you enjoy the sessions. Like I say, get any questions in the chat, and we'll look to get those addressed as soon as possible. So, quickly meet the speakers. Like I say, huge thanks to our speakers again this evening. Always love the amount of people that are willing to give up their time basically to come onto these sessions and talk about a subject matter that they have, been part of, they deal with on a daily basis, or that they've learned something new and put a session together to try and educate all of us in that area of whatever it is they're talking about. So, it goes without saying, huge thanks to Saj and to John tonight for joining us. Two slightly different areas of Azure we're going to look at tonight. So Saj will be kicking us off in about 5 or so minutes, looking at Entra ID and looking at that global secure access with Entra ID. So again, really good security topic there. So looking forward to that one, Saj. Like I say, huge thanks for joining us tonight. It's nice to see we've got a couple of friends of the Welsh Azure family joining us again, because I know you've both been on more than one occasion anyway. And then John is going to join us then just after Saj has finished to talk around what options we've got on Azure with container hosting. So again, really looking forward to that topic area, and it's both are such huge topic areas. So really enjoy seeing how speakers put together a nice presentation and talk about particular areas, because there's so much that can be said. It's like I say, selfishly, I use this as my own little personal monthly learning couple of hours. So thanks again both for joining us. Like I say, I'll timing wise. I'll be stopping rambling very soon. Mohammed will be joining us then to kick off the first session in about 5 or so minutes. So that's it. Stick around. We've got some Amazon gift vouchers as part of the quiz as well. So stick around for that quiz because they're always good for a prize or two. Last thing I want to say before we jump into the sessions is to thank the sponsors of the events. So as always, big shout out to Servant. They've been with us since pretty much since day one. They've been a huge supporter of the Welsh Azure user group and many other user groups across the UK. So huge thanks to Des Maguire and the team there at Servant. They, if you don't know who they are, go and check them on their website. They are an Azure pure play consultancy firm. Just had the privilege of working with them both when I've been with Microsoft and without, and of course, relationships with Des. They're an absolute fantastic team. So go and give them a shout if you are in the business, or go and give them a shout anyway and thank them for sponsoring the user groups. There's a little bit of information about Servant, but yeah, great cracking team of people, and huge thanks for supporting the user group. And finally, quick thank you as always to Credit Safe. Again, supporting the group, we were able to get Ridian and Shelley actually at Credit Safe approached us to offer some support because they are locally headquartered down in Cardiff, South Wales. So it was nice to have a large kind of enterprise supporting the user group on that level. Like I say, they help with the spot prizes, and dare I say we ever get back to doing in person, Matt? I'm sure we'll have the Credit Safe and Des's team down for that. So that's it. Big big gasp of shall we get back to in person? We did one about
at least one.
We did one, yeah. So in 4 years, we've done one in person. It's not good. Well, I say in person, it'll have to be a hybrid event. I'm assuming anyway, when it Matt. So I'm sure we'll get there. Let's maybe 25 is the year that we do it, Matt. Who knows, eh?
I think
saying we keep promising ourselves that we'll do it. Hey, we'll get there. But look, I'm going to stop rambling on now. Big shout out to Saj. Great to see you again, matey. Thank you for coming and talking to us this evening. Hope you're well and everything is good in your world. I'm going to hand straight over to you if that's all right, matey.
Of course it is. Thank you for having me. If you want to, I don't know what it's like in Wales, but Net Company, we've got in the office we're in, I think in the new office as well, we've got like an open space downstairs, like a huge venue that was like host 50, 60 people.
Have they got space have they got offices in Cardiff for the Net Company?
Not in Cardiff. They got one in London, they got one in Leeds, one in Birmingham. Birmingham's tiny, but the one in Leeds, we use it for like stuff like this. So we've done one where we had April come down and do last year. We haven't done an in-person one this year. So if you want to come down, we could do one in Leeds.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, to be honest, it's just pure laziness on mine and Matt's part. I think let's just say it as it is, Matt, right? I think it's just.
Yep, I think it's fair.
I can throw him under the bus as much as me. Yeah. So I think we've had a few offers actually of folks down in Cardiff. We've got a good few connections with folks like Stable. We did have access to the Tramshed offices, but I think we might have to pay for them again now because Microsoft moved out with them. So yeah, we've had a few, and I think Confused offices have offered us, Matt, haven't they? Before now, so I think we've got a few options. I think we just got to. Yeah, it's like anything though, because we've got a good few of you guys are on the call now. You've dialed in from anywhere other than South Wales, so obviously we want to make sure we can cater for. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, Matt, I noticed we joined up on LinkedIn the other day. Yeah, anything like that. If you've got anything, I think you want to just kick me and Matt and tell us to stop being lazy, and if we can try and collaborate on an event or something, it would be quite a useful thing. So
we could do a joint one if you want. I'll drag Imran's on the call. I'll drag Imran to Wales.
Is he on the call? Oh, there we go. Yeah, why not? I think that's what I need. Like rekindle some of the old crew, as it were, from the COVID years.
Great.
But yeah, no, Matt, that would be awesome. Yeah, we might have to tap you up on that one. But yeah, any ideas? Put them in the chat. We'll get there. But no, Mo, I'll let you carry on.
No problem. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, you're on the presenter view, not the presentation
view. Bear with me a second. Technology, yeah. I'll be right with you. Think I worked in this field.
I always find it's when people are waiting for you to do something. You can't click the right button. That's the approach I always have.
That's
got you. Perfect, bud. Over to you, sir.
There you go. So this is just something I'm looking at the moment. I'm working with some government organizations to put in some restrictions around internet access, around VPN and accessing to government organizations. And I came across this. This wasn't available when we started looking at this. I think this went GA back in July. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. And then it was demonstrated at Ignite. So it's something we're just playing with at the moment, testing out. So I'm just going to share how to get started, how to use the technology, and what we learned. Maybe I could come back and when we've got more experience with it, give you some pitfalls, that sort of stuff. We look at global secure access, what it does at a really high level, how to get started with it, how to set it up. A little bit about me. I've been in the IT industry 15, maybe 20 years. Started off first line support, did a lot of on-prem stuff, a lot of VMware, a little bit of Hyper-V, not so much, a lot of ESXi deployments, enterprise storage like NetApp, did a lot, and then when the cloud came along, got into cloud. I've done quite a lot of the Azure architecture certifications, some of the security certifications, and I'm an MCT. So I work for a company called Netcompany, which is Denmark's largest IT provider. And in the UK, they're predominantly infrastructure based. But also they take a lot of forces personnel on. So as part of the MCT, we deliver the 900 series, SC900, SC300 courses to forces leavers as part of the forces leavers program, which is quite interesting. And as I mentioned before, I'm co-host of the Bradford Cloud User Group. So if anybody wants to come and present virtually or potentially in person in 2025, then give me a shout. Any topic, as long as it's IT related, doesn't really matter. What we're talking about today is global secure access, what it is, what is Entra global secure access. So essentially, this line here is the definition of what I took from Microsoft, an identity-aware cloud-delivered network perimeter for the modern workspace. So essentially what they're looking to do is replace your VPN solution with a identity-aware, user-centric approach to accessing resources within the cloud, whether that's web filtering, so what websites will allow you to access if you've got the Global Secure Access client installed, whether you're controlling what access they've got to cloud resources like the Azure portals or Salesforce if you've got that deployed, or Exchange Online or SharePoint Online, or if you've got internal apps deployed, whether that's on-premise or in Azure or in any other cloud. Using Global Secure Access, you can access those services without the need for a VPN. And we'll have a look at how that's set up and done. Again, this infographics from Microsoft, so it's their security approach to accessing these particular resources without the need for a VPN. So it's identity aware, it works on any endpoint and works from any location. So this is their cloud first, security first approach to access control for any of the resources. And like I mentioned, it targets M365 services. It can control internet access, so you can govern what sites users can get to, and you can block or allow based on categories, and we'll take a look at that. And when you're accessing resources, it doesn't matter where your resources are. Other cloud providers, if it's on your on-premise hybrid environment, you can access those resources using a global secure access client. So traditionally, if you've got a VPN, if you go back before the cloud, you'd get up, you'd get dressed to go to work, you sit in the office, and your IT infrastructure was in the office. You had some firewalls at the front end that protected your environment. And then when you went home, you had a VPN client, and that VPN client connected you back to your office. And then you went out from the office to the internet via those particular firewalls. So all the traffic was egressed out those particular firewalls. And that was all well and good before we started doing hybrid working or the desire to work from anywhere, any device. Also, the problem from a security point of view with that kind of approach to where we are today is, and it existed then as well, if you had a compromised identity and someone was able to get onto your VPN and got onto your network, they'd on your network. And then they could have lateral movement around your particular network if that account was compromised. So this is looking to take a very similar approach to what those large firewalls are doing when they were on-prem, but it's identity-centric. And it's a cloud-based zero trust architecture, and you can use stuff. So if you're familiar with Entra ID, you can use conditional access, apply those conditions when you're granting access to these particular resources. Fortunately, it's not free. If you got Entra ID Suite, this is already included, both the licenses. If you got P1 or P2, you can buy an add-on for internet access or private access. I think some of the M365 licenses might also cover this as well. So when you're getting started, you will navigate to entra.microsoft.com. You can't access Global Secure Access from portal.azure.com, even though you can get some of the Entra capability in there. The Global Secure Access is only available from the Entra portal. You need a couple of licenses. Is this blurry? Can you actually see this?
It's a little bit blurry, but it's okay. It's readable.
Okay, cool. So it tells you need a Global Secure Access client, and you need certain permissions. So you need to be a Global Secure Access administrator, a security administrator, or a global admin. And then you need to activate the service in your tenant. And once it's activated, this can take a little while. You're good to go. And then it gives you this dashboard. Again, this is a test environment we're looking at tonight, but the dashboard, we'll have a look at it when we get to the portal. It gives you some information about the type of destinations, or in here, just the number of devices that are connected, users that are using this service to access the resources that you published through this particular service. What you see when you log in is there's a number of profiles that it allows you to configure. So you've got this Microsoft traffic profile, which is targeting your M365 services, your Azure portals, your M365 portals, SharePoint Online, and you can configure access to those services. And essentially what you're doing is you're split tunneling your traffic. So if you've got a Global Secure client on your laptop and you're saying to access these services, you've got to go via the GSA, then if you're not blocking the other traffic, that'll go out your local internet breakout. But everything else here is routed via the Global Secure Access, via the SSE, the Secure Service Edge, and then into your service. And then you're connecting securely via the SSE, the Secure Service Edge, into Azure, then access to your service. Same with your private access. This is if you want to publish access to resources within your environment. If you've got a website in your environment, you've got a server and you want to allow RDP access or SSH access without the need for having a VPN, you can configure this and it does exactly the same thing. And then internet access. So you can control internet access based on user identity. So you can apply, allow, or deny. So you can block a whole bunch of categories. And if that client is installed on the device that the user is connecting from, when they connect with that identity, and so the controls are no longer based on the device and the VPN client. It's based on your identity and what conditions you're defining within Global Secure Access and within the conditional access policies that apply to those particular users that are adopting these policies that you're defining in here. So again, Microsoft Traffic Profile, it controls all the M365 services, SharePoint, etc. And we'll take a look at this. So you can define it, like I said, within conditional access, you target the services that you want to use with your conditional, with your Global Secure Access. So in that example, we're targeting Exchange, SharePoint Online, but you can target the Azure portals, the Office 365 portals, anything that you want to secure via the Global Secure Edge, you can target and configure within the conditional access, and you can define the conditions. Private access is very much the same. It allows you to do two different things. So you've got a quick setup, and if you use your quick setup, it will then grant access to anyone that's got the Global Secure Access client and the corresponding conditional access policy, access internally to what you're publishing, HTTP, RDP, SSH. If you want to be more granular, you deploy a enterprise app, you configure applications with different levels of capability. So some users, you can give them HTTP access, other users, you can give them RDP, SSH access. Depends how you want to control access. So it's not as if you have to give control, one level of control to everyone. This is all they get. You can be granular with your approach, and you can grant access to some users to some applications and other users to other applications using this enterprise app capability. So these apps are published within Entra ID. We'll take a look at them as well within the Global Secure Access capability. And then again, internet access, it does exactly the same thing as I mentioned before. You can define controls based on FQDN or web category. If you look at the roadmap for Global Secure Access, you've got URL filtering and other capabilities coming down the road, down the pipeline. Right now, you can only define it on web category and FQDN. You could use filtering like star, so Microsoft.com star, and then all the subdomains, child domains also get filtered into your policy that you define within here. Again, like I mentioned, the Global Secure Access Client works on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android. It's GA on Windows and Android. It's not GA on Mac or iOS at this moment in time. They're in preview. You can use them for testing purposes. The other advantage this kind of approach has. So what we're doing right now with the customer is we're using Intune to control access to what they can access from an internet point of view. And we're using thing called proxy defined within Intune. So when the user logs in, we're using explicit deny. So everything gets dropped into the thing called proxy, apart from what is being allowed through the URLs that we're defining that you can get access to. Very limited auditing, very limited on what the users can see and what the users can't. And, from an auditing point of view, what you see, what and what kind of feedback you get is very limited. This has auditing and traffic log capability built directly into it, so you can see the user, the service that they're accessing, if it's a allow or if it's a deny, the source IP they're coming from, some traffic sent, traffic received, date, timestamp, and then you can download this for auditing capabilities. You've got alerting, but alerting isn't quite there yet when we see in the portal. So if we drop out of this for a second, we drop into the portal. Yeah. Can you guys see the screen? Yeah.
Yep, all good.
Cool. So global secure access. Once you've set it up, the initial screen that we looked at in the PowerPoint disappears. So when you log in, you've got your dashboard. It gives you a bit of information around, the type of traffic, notification alerts that you have, user profile kind of information. You can see, Microsoft Internet Access, private access, because I've got all three enabled in here, and data traffic across those. You can have a look in the details category. You can have a look at your monitoring. So it gives you traffic logs about what's allowed, what's been denied in this, and we'll generate some more traffic in a bit. The traffic isn't instantaneous, so once you do it on the client end, you'll see it doesn't appear in here automatically. You've got audit logs in here that you can have a look at and export and download. Alerts, not available at this moment in time. This feature is being worked on. So this is still being developed. It is GA, and you can use the capability. But there's a few steps that you need to step through. So once you've got the right permissions and you've enabled the service, you then need to come in here and enable the particular profiles. What you see here is you've got linked conditional access policies. So by default, it picks up some of the policies here. You don't have to use the ones that is picked up. I just left them and show you. So it's picked up terms of use, it's picked up the global access administrator, MFA enforcement over here. But then you define the policies within conditional access and they're applied to this. So it'll reflect in here. The other thing you need to do is target users or groups. So this is a test environment. We're targeting a couple of test users, but realistically, you want to target a group and drop a group and then drop your users into that particular group. Once you've enabled your traffic profile, so you want to control internet access. The first thing you do is enable this. The next thing you want to do is go to secure and figure some web filtering content. So we've got some rules that already exist here, but if you look at a policy, give it a name, test, most imaginative name. You've got the ability for put in a description, block or allow, and then you configure some rules. And the rules, by the way, I can't see the chart at the moment, so if anybody's got any questions, just shout out, not a problem. So you give the rule a name, and you've got a web category FQDA. And if you look at the categories, there's a whole host of predefined categories that you could use. Violence, weapons, artificial intelligence. I'm not sure why you want to block that, but it's there if you want to block it. Business use, and then all the standard stuff around abuse, criminality, dating, hacking, social media. And then once you create this rule, review and create. So if you look at one that's already created, for example, block all social media, it's got a single rule in here, but you can add multiple rules in here. So and then you can add a second rule and third rule and fourth rule. Once you create your rule set, you create a security profile. And when you create a security profile, you see you've got a priority on the security profile. You've also got a priority on the rules within the security profile. And the reason this is to resolve any conflict. So if you've got, like here, you've got block all social media, but you've got allow Twitter, this is the other way around. I'm not applying this one. This is a test one for, but if this was 250 and this was 200, because the 200 is higher than the 250, what would happen is this would take precedent over that particular profile. And then within your security profiles here, when you've got rules, you'll grant them priorities. So priority over here takes precedent over what you've got defined within here. So we've got block social media here, but we're allowing Twitter for some users. And here we've got block social media for everyone. And once you've created your security profile, you come into protection and you create conditional access policy. If you look at the one that we already created, essentially what you're doing is you give it a name. No different from anything else you grant it to a particular user. But when you look at the resource type, you're targeting global secure access as your resource type. And then ideally, the recommendation is not to use any of the grant controls here, because if you enable MFA here, what would happen is when the user goes to use Internet Explorer on their device, it's asking them for MFA. So you're not really interested from an internet access point of view using the control access, but your controls are defined within your rule set that you're defining within your web content filtering rules and your security policies here, because in sessions, you're targeting the security profile that you've defined. So we've got block social media, so as a security profile, and the security profile here, if you look at block social media, we've got a single rule that says block social media. So if you look at the client end, I've got a VM somewhere. Bear with me. We've got the global secure client installed. This user's not admin, so just give me a second with you. So when you look, it gives you some information about the client. It does a health check for you, tells you all the services that are running. If you want to do any forwarding profile or traffic flow, you can start collecting logs on here and generate some data when we start doing something. And what it does is, so we're blocking social media for these particular users. So if we went to x.com, so internet's working, by the way, so it's a bit slow, apologies. So this is just a MSN homepage. We click on the story, internet's working. So here it's using my home internet breakout to get into the internet. So we're split tunneling the traffic here. So what we've said is we're blocking social media. So I can get to stuff like this. I can get to BBC and it won't block me. But as soon as I try to get to a social media site like x.com, it doesn't allow you access. It gives you this, can't reach this page. We can't get to TikTok, Facebook. You'll get the same response. Get the idea. And we know this is working because of the GSA, because we can disable the GSA client. I'm not posting any restrictions at this moment in time. So if we disable this, give it a few seconds. Then if we come here and we go to x.com, it should hopefully it works. Maybe, perhaps. I'll get there. So it should give me x.com. Twitter. Oh, maybe, perhaps. We'll come back and we'll see if it's working. Bizarre. Demos don't always work. There you go, look at that. So we can get to x.com so long as we disable the client. Because we're disabling the client, the policy is no longer applying. If you're doing this in a real live environment, you want to force some restrictions around this particular client. So I've just installed it locally. You can install it through Intune, for example. You need to package it as an Intune file and then distribute it. And there's some controls around that as well. The other profile that we have, if you go back to drop this, the other profiles that we have are Microsoft 365 profile. Again, similar kind of stuff. You enable the profile. The other thing you need to do in here is enable in session management. You need to enable adaptive access, and that allows for some signaling in conditional access. What it does when you enable this, after a little while, it will create a new location for you. So in conditional access, when you look at named locations, it creates this all compliant networks locations for you that you can now use within your global secure access profile. So when you're creating conditional access policies, you can target this new location. So again, it's very similar. You have to target users. You've got your link conditional access policies and you've got to target the users. We're targeting the same test user. Then you create a conditional access policy to utilize this new location that's been created within here. And if you look at the policy that we've created, what we're saying is same test user. Any network, we've got two target resources. So we're targeting Exchange Online, SharePoint Online in our example over here. And then here we're including any network where we're excluding the new all compliant network location. The reason why we're excluding this is because we're blocking everything else. So if you want to get to these resources, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, you will need to come via this GSA client, which is then going to use this new network that's been created, the all compliant network. And if you're coming from anywhere else, we're going to block this particular access. Again, it's applied to the same test user. So if you look at the client end, if you go to Outlook.com, bit of luck. Apologies, it's a bit slow. That would work, but then if we disable the client, we'll get the same problem. It will stop working. And essentially, what you're doing is the policy is forcing access via the global secure client. And you could, like I said, you can target any of the services that you want. You can target SharePoint Online. You can target the Azure portals. Here we're just configuring this. If you disable the client, it's a bit slow. I won't do it on this example. You get the same outcome. It doesn't work for those particular users. So you've got that security control based around a user-centric approach, based around conditions that you define within your conditional access. So single network location, here we're blocking access unless you're coming from that excluded particular network. But if you want to define other conditions, you've got user risk assessment, you've got sign-in risk. This is the example I'm just showing you. You've got device and platforms. You can define whatever you want. If devices are registered in Entra ID, managed by Intune, you can have, managed devices, and then you can, those conditions, you can define within those environments. So it really depends how you want to apply your conditional access policies onto those particular users. The other thing you can do without the need for a VPN is give users access to resources within your environment. So within global secure access, again, same approach, enable your private access profile. Then what you need to do is download this connector. This connector is what you install at your end where your application is. So in our example, it just show you the lab. What I've got is I've got a single server running. And this is, I've run IIS, I've installed IIS on this for the demo for today, but I've also installed the connector on this particular server here. It doesn't need to sit on that particular server that you've got your application. You can sit on any Windows server, and you can have multiples of these for HA purposes. You can install it at the Google end, at the AWS end, on your on-premises network, and it's an outbound connection from here. And then once you've got your connector installed, you then create a application. So in applications, you've got your quick access, which I've not configured. But again, quick access, you would give it a name, quick access. The default is the connector group that we've created in here. And then you configure some rules around, based on IP address, CIDR, FQDN, and then the IP address that you're coming from. So in our case, the internal IP address, not the public IP address of the machine. So 10.0.1.4, for example, and then what port. So if you're publishing IAS 80.443, you can do 80.443. So you can have multiple protocols here that you want to define. If you want to use quick access for RDP 3389, you can define that in here as well. It just depends how you want to configure it. And then the users that you apply to this have access to that particular service that you've deployed. The other way you can do it is create some enterprise applications, which is what we've done here. Got an RDP application, and that's purely 3389. If you look back at the enterprise applications and we create a new one, just a step through the process. So again, give it a name. So if you said SSH, for example, click on save on that. Might take a little while. And then on the application segment, you can add an application segment, and then again, IP address, FQDN, CIDR block, give it an IP address 0.1.4, give it a port, SSH is 22, I think. Then apply, and then save. What's this doing that? If you just go back to the enterprise application, look at the one that we already have. Once you've done that, you've got an application 3389. And then in here, you've got users and groups. So you need to define the users or groups that are going to be allowed access using 3389. And then here, if you've got a conditional access policy, if you actually create a policy from here, what it does, it picks a target resource for you already. If you create it from up here, this is blank, and you have to go find the target resource. So if you look at our defined conditional access policies that we already have for this, what we've done is we've created a RDP profile. So what we're saying is the name, our test user account, a single resource, which is the RDP enterprise app that we've created. You've defined the user in there. We also need to define in here from a conditional access point of view. And we're saying grant. We defined MFA, but again, you can define multiple policies in here. If you want to have additional conditions to access your application or access your server or whatever it is that you're publishing out via the Global Secure Access client, it's entirely up to you. There's a whole bunch of conditions that you can find in here: location, device and platforms, filters, and you can just configure this based on what your security needs are. So if you look at our server, it's got public IP address, but it's also got this private IP address of 10.0.1.4. Like I said, I'm running IIS on this particular server. So if you go back to our test VM, give it a look. So it'll ask you for the pin codes that will enable MFA. And you should, over its private IP address, not the public IP address, without the requirement for any VPN installed on your machine, grant you access to your VM. The other thing we can do, we can just minimize this thing. So like I mentioned, we're running IIS on this particular server. Again, same IP address. And we're hitting the private IP address of the server itself. So again, we're hitting this IP address over the global secure access client over the SSE capability that Microsoft has in place to access your private resources using that global secure access client. And now this is a user-centric zero trust approach because you're applying conditions on that particular user, like enforcing MFA, like enforcing the type of device that they're coming from. And this is cross-platform. It will be available on other devices at this moment in time. Android is GA, Windows is GA, iOS, Mac OS are in preview, and you can use it and download it. So that concludes the demo and a quick run through of global secure access. I think I have mentioned. So if you look at what is the secure access service edge? So this is a global service that Microsoft has put out there, and there's a whole lot of capability that Microsoft has put out there around SD-WAN capability, secure web gateway capability. So it's worth reading. I'll put this into the chat. So the global secure access, the M365 capability, the internet access is part of the secure web gateway. So it's using the secure web gateway component of the Microsoft SASE deployment to broker that connection from your client into your particular environment. Like I mentioned, you've got lots of these controls without the need for having a VPN solution deployed, and it's user-centric, so it's targeting those particular users, and you can be as granular as you want with the security approach that you have around what you access, what users get, what controls you put in place. And that's me on the demo. And a quick run through of GSA. Any questions, anyone? Any commentary, feedback, anything?
Just having a quick look through the chat. There's no way of changing the screen yet, is there? From that, can't get there to anything other. I think Dee just mentioned it's a shame that there's no way of changing it. It's like a block message. You know, when you're blocking websites.
Oh, that's the only message you get at the moment. There might be a way to change that. I don't know. I haven't found one at the moment. So if I do, I'll happily share that.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen that a few times. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything. I'm sure there's probably something in the pipeline as always. I'm not sure there's any other.
Quite a lot of development in the pipeline. I don't think I've seen that in the pipeline, to be honest with you. So, like I said, there's a lot of stuff around the type of filtering you could do around URL filtering and that sort of stuff. And that capability is coming down the pipeline. And then the clients that you're targeting, so it will work on Mac OS, it will work on your mobile phones, your iPhone, stuff like that. It doesn't at this, it does, but only from a preview point of view. So that will go GA at some point. I like the fact that the controls that you have now without the need for a VPN, so you don't need to deploy any VPN infrastructure in your cloud or on-prem. Dee, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I'm cognizant that it's a very new product and there's still a lot of development going on. Are you recommending this to your clients proactively, or are you still saying going to NetScaler or one of the other compete products until Microsoft kind of matures that offering?
So I personally don't work for Microsoft, but we are testing it internally, for a customer that we're using it with. So what you've got is, from my experience, you've got approaches like, for example, if you deploy this through Intune, you've got the bunch of Intune controls that can do this, but it's very limited. So if you're using sync call proxy, it's essentially writing to the registry of your machine, and you'll hit a hard limit at some point when you're defining URL blocks, especially in an environment where, for example, you're deploying privilege access. And if you're following the privilege access model defined by Microsoft and NCSE, it's an explicit allow, not blocking by category. So you run out of the URL controls. The other approach you can do is the approach that you mentioned and use some of those particular products, or use something like FortiGate firewall and have URL filtering. But then it's dependent on how you're going to route your traffic into your environment to go out your particular firewalls or out that particular service. The web filtering capability here is the bit that we're testing with the client at this moment in time. So the GSA client will sit on the devices that we want to use, and we will have a bunch of restrictions around what websites they can and can't access. So we are looking to use it with our customers. We have pitched it for a second customer. So we are looking to actively use it, even though it's a new product. The internet capability, the internet profile capability looks quite mature. And like I said, I would prefer it if you had URL filtering, but even the internet capability doesn't give you that. If it's FQDN or categories based on crime, that sort of stuff. So yeah, we are actively using it and testing it with customers.
Cool. Really useful. Thank you.
No problem.
Cheers, D. Cool. No more questions? Any more questions for Saj, or are we? No, awesome. As always, Saj, thank you for that, sir.
No
Everybody
problem.
would like to show their appreciation with the react button. Are we doing it in real life still? No, not yet.
Hope you enjoyed it. I tried to do more. So any feedback, any comments, any questions, I'm on Twitter. Just reach out. I'm also on LinkedIn. So that's my LinkedIn profile. I'll stick Twitter in there as well. So like I said, any questions, any feedback. If you want to come and present at the Bradford Cloud User Group 2025, give us a shout.
I dropped the
we'll
chat.
happily host you.
I dropped the link to the meetup in the chat earlier on, to scroll up and grab that.
I appreciate that.
But
Thank you.
no, great session. Thanks for that, Saj. Really good. I always find those Intune / security, as somebody that's dabbled with it in the past a little bit, and now I'm firmly in my infrastructure bucket on the other side of the fence. I always find them that it's like you can do whatever it is that you want to do. You just have to figure out what it is that you want to do first. Is the hard part, right? And nobody can ever decide what it is that they actually want to do. So it's just finding your way around that. I find like a labyrinth. Maybe that's just me, but you did really good demo there, Saj. I was able to follow along, which is saying something, right? So
Nice.
appreciate it.
That's good. I mean, a lot of the 365 capability, like Intune and this stuff, it's got a lot of crossover to infrastructure. It's more now deciding we've got options around how we want to control it. So the other thing you can do, for example, is like if you're using point-to-site VPN, you still need, your VPN capability in Azure, but it doesn't have to be certificate-based VPN authentication. You can do Entra-based VPN authentication. And then, so you can then apply conditional access to those users that are going in, and you can apply PIM. So even though somebody might be on your network, there's none of that lateral movement unless they go through PIM.
Okay.
Yeah. So, there's the fact that you've got options. It's always DNS. Yes, it's always DNS. Is, in my opinion, a good thing, to be honest with you. And the more the better, because you'll always find situations where you can't use this kind of capability. Especially in the field where John works and I work, some of this needs to be approved. So someone will have to go through a bunch of governance gates to test it, even though you say it does X, Y, Z, we can give you all the documentation, stuff like that. Someone will have to go through all the governance gates. Whereas when I did a lot of work in the private sector, you'd pitch it to somebody and say, yeah, here's some money, go test it. So it's far easier.
It is, yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? Having a good test and demo environment to be able to, kind of trial some of these policies and, I mean, I know it used to be kind of what happens if I apply this, go and tell me everything I'm going to break kind of thing. But I'm not sure what it's like these days. You used to have those kind of features at one point, but I'm sure there's too many complexities now for that to you've got to make sense of that as well, right?
No, exactly. But it's always good. It's always learning, so.
It is. No, it's all good stuff, but no, really good session. Thanks again, Saj. Appreciate it, sir, and good to see you again, and good luck with the cloud, the Bradford Cloud User Group, and yeah, go enjoy that if you're not already following it, to everybody in the chat there.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Anytime, sir. We'll catch up very soon. Thank you again.
No problem.
Right, we shall move swiftly onwards to another friend of the user group. Mr. John Killmister has joined us again, and we're talking containers, right, John? I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Hopefully you can see my screen. Can you see the screen?
Got you. Yep, loud and clear coming through. All good.
Great. So you can see the slide okay there?
Perfect.
Brilliant. So yeah, as you said, John, we're going to talk about containers on Azure. And it's a huge topic. We're not going to be able to do a deep dive on Kubernetes or any of the individual services. But really, this talk is about navigating all of the options. There are, I don't know, 6, 7 different ways of hosting a container. So we're going to look at some of the pros and the cons of each of them, and just hopefully inspire you to take a deeper look at some of them that you might not have heard about or might not have thought about for your particular example. But before we do that, let me get, oh, sorry, the slides. Let's get the slides working properly. There we go. Right, so let me introduce myself. My name is John Killmister, and if you haven't met me before, I'm a software engineer and have been for over 20 years now, and more recently an architect helping development teams work better with Azure. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at John Killmister. I also have a blog at blueboxes.co.uk where I talk about Azure and software engineering and these kinds of things. So before we go into the individual services, I wanted to give a bit of a background and just talk a little bit more about containers generally. It's been really good to see containers being used quite heavily now in the development space. And recently, Docker did a survey, a state of application development report, and it showed that 80% of developers are now using containers as part of their development process. And that might be local development through things like dev containers, or just having certain parts of the application, for example, a backend database, hosted in a container to make life easy. Now, this talk, we're not going to be just focusing on developers, but I think it's a good place to start, as you can see the way the industry has generally been moving. But although we've got 80% of developers using it in the development environment, I think most of you will recognize that isn't necessarily how the majority of our code or applications are running in production. And a slightly different survey showed that 47% of people want to run them in production, which is good. It's down from the 80%, but it's still a good number. But what really surprised me from this one was that only 12% are actually running them in production. So we've gone from 80% of people running it in a development environment to only 12% running it in production. Now, these are slightly different surveys. This one was still done in 24, but with a slightly different group of people. So numbers might not match up, but it does show there is a stark difference. And I want to have a quick think about, well, why is that? And really set the scene about why this presentation has been put together. And for me, when I talk to engineering teams and talk about how we want to host our applications in the future, containers are a big part of that. And it's really good to see that everyone's really keen on them. But we start talking about how's it going to work in production? And we have to talk about scalability, disaster recovery, networking, who's going to manage it, patch it, and all of those various other bits and pieces. And really quickly, we come on to the topic of Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is a great ecosystem. There is a lot of support for it. And if you're completely bought into it, you can get a lot of value out of Kubernetes. However, it does have a really steep learning curve. And when people start looking at this, they quickly realize that, is this something that we want to do? It's going to be complex. It's going to take time to learn. And do we really have the capacity? And then they go, actually, maybe not. We'll stick with what we've got. And then they end up in a situation where they've got containers in development, but not quite in production. There have even been case studies where whole teams have moved over to a containerized solution, be that on Kubernetes, and then they've actually rolled it back because they haven't got the teams to manage the Kubernetes cluster. And this kind of fear that I sometimes see around Kubernetes, I think Kubernetes is an option when we're talking about containerization and hosting it in a production environment. But the key thing is that it's not the only option, and it's really going to depend on your circumstances. So this isn't a talk about Kubernetes or not Kubernetes. It's really about, let's have a look at all of the options that are available in Azure. Some of those do include Kubernetes and Kubernetes-like options. But let's look at it of what are the pros and cons of each solution. So that sets the scene about why we want to look at the range of different options. But before we look at those options, I want to take a step back and talk about containerization workflow. There's probably many people on this call who aren't necessarily developers, and they come from a different perspective. They might be wanting to host an off-the-shelf application. Take, I don't know, a load balancer that's in a container that a third party is providing. We just want to take that and we want to host it. So I wanted to get a little bit of background about what happens with containers and how they're created, and set the scene about kind of what part of that process we're going to be focusing on today. So all containers start with a Docker file, and that Docker file sets out the instructions on what you want to do. So it contains the base image. It also contains any files that you want to copy in, any other files that you want to download and include as part of that, and then ports and things that we might want to expose, and finally any entry points to that container. So that's all defined in a single file. And then we go through the build process that takes that definition, it executes it and creates your different image layers, and then we'll push that into an artifact store. And when I say an artifact store, you might be more familiar with something, say, like Docker Hub, or in Azure, we've got Azure Container Registry, or ACR. And this is where you might start your journey. If you are taking an off-the-shelf image, someone else would have done the Docker file in the building, and then you're just going to an artifact store or a registry and pulling the image directly from there. Following that, we have a bit of orchestration. So it's not that common to run a single container in isolation. It's totally possible, it does work, but more than likely we've got some orchestration where we're going to be running multiple containers, and we need to define networking and other bits of relationship between those containers. And that might be done in something like a compose file or a kube file, various other ways, depending on how you... Oh, are we losing audio? Anyone else? No, we're good. I can see the chat, by the way, so if you do have any questions, just drop it in the chat and I'll try to find a good place to stop. Oh, okay. Well, so yes, so we have the orchestration definition. As I say, depending on what you're doing, depends on what type of orchestration you're going to use. And then once we've got that, we can actually then go and deploy and run our container and environments. And that's what really we're going to focus on here, is this second half, the orchestration, the deploying and running. But I did want to just give you a bit of a background on the other parts, because they are an important part of the process, and it's good to understand those in order to fully understand how we can then orchestrate, deploy and run our containers. So what does Azure do to help us with this? Well, we have a whole range of different options, and they have different pros and cons. We have things like Azure Container Instances, ACI. By the way, there will be lots of acronyms here, so I'll try and keep up with going with the full name. But if you get lost, do put something in the chat and we can catch back up on it. So Azure Container Instances, a really light way of running containers. They've been in the platform for some time. We have Azure Container Registry tasks. Now, not necessarily a way that you might think of running a container, but we will have a quick look at what that can do for us. We have specialist container support. So if we're using some of our PaaS solutions, such as Databricks or analytical services, we can use containers in those PaaS services. We have app service plans, again, been around some time, but they now support containers. We have Azure Container Apps, one of the newer services. Azure Container Workloads on Azure Batch, Azure Kubernetes services, and finally, we can run containers on VMs. So that's a really high level kind of sweep across the Azure infrastructure landscape and the things that we can host containers. Now, as you can see there, we're going from serverless on the left all the way through to the infrastructure as code on the right. And with that come different compromises. As with every serverless offering, we're really trading off complexity. So we've got less complexity when we're going serverless through to PaaS, and more complexity when we go to IaaS. But it's quicker to get started, and there's overall less maintenance. We are trading that off with a higher cost. And when I say a higher cost here, we're talking about a higher cost in Azure. Now, because it might be that although there's a lower cost if you go with infrastructure as a service, you might have a higher staffing cost because you have to do all the maintenance and other bits. Also, you get less control with serverless, which can be a good thing, and it could be a negative thing. It really does depend on what your needs are. So that's a very quick summary of the kind of serverless as trade-offs. But when we're looking at containerization, we need to go a bit deeper than that. So as we go through each of these services, we're going to be having a look at some of the key terminology, the structure about how the compute is handled versus where the containers are actually going to be run from. We're going to look at the individual features of that given service. And of course, we're going to look at the pricing model because it wouldn't be complete without that. So starting with the first one, Azure Container Registry Tasks. Now, it could be said that this isn't really hosting or running a container, but I did want to cover it because we can actually take a container image and execute it and get an output. It's actually the simplest way of running a container in Azure. We don't have to provision any additional infrastructure, and we can just, in one line, run our task. So because these are so simple and they're completely serverless, we don't have any support for GPUs, attached storage, sidecars. There's no scaling or anything like that. We can scale in some ways because these jobs have to run somewhere, and they actually run on agents. So a lot like a CI/CD situation, you have agents, and there are agents that you can just use. But if you really want, you can use your own agents. And in theory there, you could go for larger servers. They are in preview at the moment and only support Linux. But there are some good use cases for these. So you can use these tasks to actually build the container. So that build step that we talked about, where you've got your Docker file and you want to build it, you can do that remotely through Azure Container Registry Tasks. And I actually do this quite often because if you want to build, if you're on a Windows machine and you want to build a Linux image or vice versa, although it's possible, it is better to build it on the underlying operating system. And you can do that through ACR tasks. But the other thing that I use them for is automated scheduled maintenance tasks, because these tasks can be one-off, but you can also schedule them. So we can schedule maintenance tasks. It just runs up a container and then exits when it's finished. And the pricing model for these is that you're just charged on $1 per second of the task running. So let's have a quick look at how that might actually run. We won't spend too long on this. It's pretty straightforward. First thing to say, though, we do need to have our image in an Azure Container Registry. So all of the other options we look at, our container registry can be anywhere. It can be Docker Hub, it can be in Azure or not. But for this particular one, they have to be in the Azure Container Registry. We do that just by locally pulling the image, tagging it, and pushing it up to our registry. Once we've got that, to actually run a task or run an image, we can just use a simple ACR run task, pass in what we want, the name of our image, and any arguments. In this one, we've just got just a quick message, and as you can see here, it queues it up on the agent, pulls down the image, executes it, and we get everything out in the terminal there. And if we go into the portal, we can navigate to our ACR, and you see tasks under the side there. And if we go to runs, we can then see all of the runs that have previously been there, and you can see the same output. So that's a very quick overview of ACR tasks. They're not a fully fledged way of hosting a container, but they are a way of quickly just running one, especially if it will output some text and exit. The next one to talk about is container instances. And container instances have been around for a while in Azure. And it's one that I keep going back to and I still use, even though I'm also using things like Kubernetes and app service plans. I still go back to these for running simple containers. And the way they work is that we create an Azure container group, and that is your compute. When you create one of these, you specify how much CPU and how much RAM you're going to use. You can then put one or more containers in there, but they'll all run on that same compute. So these, being an older service, have a really rich set of features. They support private endpoints, VNets, public IP addresses, a host of other things. They do support GPUs, but it's recommended actually for GPU workloads now to move to Kubernetes. Attached storage is supported under Linux, not Windows. And we can kind of get sidecars, which, by the fact that we're running multiple containers all on the same compute. But the key disadvantage for this is that we cannot scale them. So you can't have two copies of it running. If it's under particularly heavy load, you have to create a whole new container group. There's also no easy integration with things like SSL and those kind of things. But where they are useful is if you want to just run a one-off background task, you can just spin up the container, run once, and it's finished. Because when no containers are running, it will scale to 0 and you're not charged for that. You're only charged for the times that it is running. I actually use these for Azure DevOps build agents. So it takes a task, runs the container. Once that Azure DevOps build is finished, the container will exit, and then it will automatically spin up a new one. In doing so, it clears all the storage, so they run quite efficiently. Pricing model for these is that you're being charged for every CPU second and every gigabyte of memory used as well per second. How do we go about creating these? Well, as with most services in Azure, we can create things using Bicep or Terraform. We can also use the CLI, and we can use the portal. I'm going to show you in the rest of this presentation all Azure CLI commands, mainly because they're quite succinct and they can fit on the screen quite nicely, and we can see what options are provided. But the process is pretty much the same no matter what method you are using to create these. So in here, we're just creating a AZ container create, and that is creating the container group. We have to put it in a resource group, obviously, and give it a name. And then we specify the image, the DNS label, and if it's Linux or Windows, along with the CPU and memory. And that's going to create us a group and put one container in it. Once we go into the portal, we can see that container there. And if there were multiple containers, they'd be listed. And we can see how many restarts it's had. By default, they will auto restart once they exit. So if you have a container that's just going to run once, you will want to just change it so it doesn't keep trying to restart. But from here, we can have a look at its properties, see what image it is, what ports we're exposing, CPU, memory, that kind of thing. We can also see the logs that come from the output, and we can actually connect to the image if we need to, so the running container with a shell. If we want to run multiple containers, things get slightly more complicated, but we can specify our containers in a file. And here you can see there are two containers in a YAML file, the Hello World and the Hello World sidecar, and they run side by side, sharing the compute. And yeah, we just specify the file as part of the creation process. If we want more memory or CPU, we do have to recreate the container group. So yeah, really useful, easy to use service that doesn't take a very long, doesn't have a very steep learning curve, but not great if you've got, say, a website that you need to scale. So I wanted to briefly mention specialist images. Now, specialist images, what I mean by that, well, this is if, for example, you're using a PaaS or a serverless solution like Azure Functions, you have the option to provide your own image. In each service, these are slightly different. So, for example, in the machine learning PaaS service, you're providing an image with a with a model already in that image. Databricks, it's slightly different again, and Azure Functions, you're hosting your function on that container. So each of them have their own kind of like specialist things, and that's why I can't really say yes that supports GPU or it doesn't, or it supports attached storage or not, because it really does depend on the PaaS service. But I didn't want to go through this whole presentation and kind of omit the fact that these exist, because they are really valid options. And if you are in a situation where you are developing your own software and you don't have a large infrastructure team to manage all of the container hosting, then this can be a really nice solution if you just want to extend just slightly the PaaS solution. Yeah, and it gives you that seamless integration with existing Azure services. But because you are using a PaaS solution, you are still limited by the features that are available under that. And the pricing model, again, is kind of based on the individual PaaS services. So I wanted to mention that, and if it is of interest, do go and have a look at those individual ways. But it might be a cheaper and easier way to manage hosting containers in certain circumstances. Now, app service plans. I really like app service plans. If you've not used them before, what they are, they're a PaaS solution inside Azure, so I don't have to worry about patching them. All you do is you provide your code, be that normally it's a website, but it can be in many different languages. You provide that code either as individual files or as a zip, and it will run it for you on a set of shared compute. And that shared compute we call an app service plan. So here is the kind of structure of it. So we have an app service plan, and you pick this, and it's a combination of memory, CPU, and various other settings. So you pick the one that suits you. And then onto that app service plan, we put one or more web apps, Azure Functions, or web jobs. And we can do this with containers now. So instead of passing it a zip file of your application or the individual files, we can actually specify a container for it to run. Now, containers were added after App Service Plan had been around for a long period of time. So the features that you get in this are slightly different to what you'll see later on under other services like Azure Container Apps and things like that. They also don't support GPU and things like, it's a relatively new feature, so things like sidecars, they are being added at the moment, and they are in preview and only with Linux service plans. But as I mentioned, they're a very mature service, and that means that you get a load of extra features that you might not see elsewhere. So you get easy auth, you get deployment slots, you get your free managed SSL certificates. And interestingly, if you're using Linux app service plans, you might actually already be using containers without realizing it. So if you upload a website, say like a WordPress site, onto app service plans and run it under Linux, Microsoft will wrap that in a container for you, and then it is run. So you might actually be using containers without realizing it. But if we explicitly give it a container image, yeah, that can be done under Windows or Linux. However, as I mentioned, app service plans weren't built with containers in mind from the beginning. They've been added afterwards. And as such, we are missing some of the features that you would get from a fully sort of container first approach that we'll see when we get to things like Kubernetes. So the health endpoint support, you just get one health endpoint rather than a ready, live, and startup health endpoints. There's no support at the moment for things like Dapper, which allows containers to talk to each other in an abstracted way. And probably one of the biggest drawbacks to app service plans is that things scale all together. So we showed that you create the compute once, and all of the web apps that you put on there, or functions or web jobs, all live together on that same compute. And if we want to scale up or we want to scale out, we're scaling all those apps at the same time. So if we've got a microservices solution that's maybe, say, 10 apps, a front-end website plus sort of 9 back-end services, if one of those services comes under heavy load and we decide to scale, then we are scaling all of the apps at once. You can't individually scale them. And this is true if you're hosting app service plans with individual zip files or code, as it is if you're using containers. But it is one of the more sort of, one of the things to think about if you're going, oh, app service plans are going to be great for containers, my microservice container solution. However, with all of that said, it is still a really good platform if we've got websites that want to auto scale without having lots of infrastructure management. And I like app service plans hosting containers as a bit of a stepping stone. So if you're thinking about moving to containers, if you are working on custom software and deploying it at the moment to app service plans, you could move to containers on app service plans as a stepping stone. So you're still managing and using them in pretty much the same way. There are a few little tweaks and changes that you have to make, but it's pretty much the same. So you can use containers under app service plans and have the same management as you do today, but you would have moved to containers, and then later on you could potentially then move to another plan, another hosting option if you want. Pricing model, sorry, I forgot to mention that it is, you pay for the app service plan, and these plans are based on combinations of CPU, RAM, and storage presets, and they're all charged per hour. The plans do start from free, and there are some basic plans as well as isolated plans if you want. One of the other drawbacks to mention with this, though, is that you can't scale to 0, and we will come back and talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So to create these, we first of all create that app service plan, and that's the compute. You can see there we're passing in a few parameters: name, resource group, location, and most importantly, the SKU. In this case, it's a basic one SKU. And then once we've done that, we can create multiple apps in that. And in this case, we're creating a web app, and we're passing in the container image name there. Now, configuration of that, for example, what ports do we want to hook up, because the traffic's going to arrive in on port 443 or 80, depending on what we're doing. But inside, the container might be exposing another port, like port 5000. And we can actually customize that through adding in some app settings. So here you can see we set the website port to 5000. So it will come in on 443, and then it will redirect to 5000 and pass that into the container. If we want to run multiple containers at once, we can use a Docker Compose file. A Docker Compose file will work locally, and then you can just use that same Compose file up in Azure. Actually, I say the same Compose file. There are some limitations around things like storage that you might need to be aware of. But in principle, you can use a Compose file in order to run multiple containers should you want to. And inside the app service plan, inside the portal, under the deployment center, you can then actually see those settings that we've just created. So here we've got the container type, where it's coming from, and if we wanted to use an authenticated Azure Container Registry, an authenticated registry such as Azure Container Registry, we can put in things like username, a login, and password. You can see the config there. That's from the Compose file. And one of the things that I do like about one thing I like about hosting containers on app service plans is that you can use webhooks. So you push a new image to your ACR, and that can fire a webhook, and then you can attach that to this app service plan. And when it gets hit by that webhook, it will then deploy a new version of your app. So you can have a really seamless CI/CD process. New image comes in, and it can be deployed straight to your app service plan, or your app in your app service plan, with no manual steps. I want to talk about Azure Container Apps next. Azure Container Apps, some people have kind of suggested they're kind of Kubernetes on easy mode. Another way of looking at them is if we were to take app service plans that we've just talked about, but we designed them with a Kubernetes first approach. So take the simplicity and the PaaS aspects of app service plans, the way we can manage everything through the portal, the way we get our free SSLs, the way we can put easy auth on the front, or that we can put we can do lots of other features. But let's have all the benefits we have in Kubernetes without all of the complexity and the networking and the other things that we have to manage. So it kind of sits somewhere halfway between the two of the app service plans and the Kubernetes solution. And the way it works looks very familiar. So we have something called an Azure App Container Environment, and that is our compute that sits around everything. And onto that compute, we can put one or more container apps with sidecars and things. We could have container jobs, and we can have function apps. And if you think back how that looked on the back on the app service plans, it's pretty much a one-to-one as far as the setup is concerned. However, one of the advantages you get with container apps is that every app that you do deploy, you can specify if you want it to be publicly available, or if you want any ingress, and then decide if you want it to be publicly available or just available to the other apps in that environment. So that's something that we can't do with app service plans. With app service plans, by default, everything is just public. It is something that we can do with Kubernetes, but to do it with Kubernetes, we need lots of YAML files to configure it. So we have some nice simple options here. You put your app in, and then you decide if you want it to be have an ingress, and if it does have an ingress, your only real options are: is it public or is it going to be just for the apps inside? So we've got secure by default there. It won't have an ingress by default, shall I say? You also get some other settings as well in there. So the main advantage, I think I've hopefully conveyed, is that you're going to get a lot of the Kubernetes features, but without the complexity. You get on top of that, you also get things like free custom SSL that you don't get with the Kubernetes option. And we get support for Dapper, OTel, and lots of other cloud native technologies. In preview at the moment, there's also support for add-ons, meaning that we can get even more of the features of Kubernetes with the simple operations. The drawback, though, so the terminology is a bit unusual. It's not aligned with Azure Kubernetes services. So we don't see mentions of things like pods and nodes and things like that. But it's also not quite aligned with the app service plans either. So we've got a whole new set of terminology to learn. It's not huge, but it is something. At this point, there's also no support for Windows containers. I think a lot of people are moving away from Windows containers, or at least when we move from a hosting method onto containers, tend to go to Linux containers. But there are some scenarios where Windows containers are still important. So if you do need Windows containers, you will need to look at this point something like either Kubernetes or back at service plans. So these are really good for cloud native microservices, because we can have those apps in the back end be private. We can also independently scale each of the apps inside this environment, unlike an app service plan. But the pricing model is quite different. So here we are charged for the CPU seconds and gigabyte seconds of memory, much like we were back with the Azure Container Instances, but quite different than the app service plans. App service plans, you're buying the compute at the plan level, and that comes like a pre-packaged amount of memory and CPU. How do we go about creating one of these? Well, it's looking pretty similar. So we create an app, we create the environment, the app service environment, the container environment, and then we create our apps and put them on there. And as it's a we can specify the target port, and we specify the ingress and various other bits and pieces. I've compared these back to app service plans a few times, and there are two little bits that I wanted to call out about this. So in app service plans, we have the concept of deployment slots, and these are different versions of your application that can be sat side by side, with the main idea being that you would route a percentage of, you'd put a new version in another slot, and you would route traffic to that over time until you were completely happy, and then you'd completely switch to it. And we have deployment slots on app service plans, we have revisions on Azure Container Apps, and both of them support routing a percentage of the traffic to another revision or another deployment slot. We can also swap back if we have a problem really quickly, and it will only swap in completely healthy apps by checking that health endpoint. But we do have some differences. On the app service plans, these deployment slots are updatable. You can put in new versions of the code whenever you need to. In the revisions side of things, each revision is immutable and they are versioned. So each time we just create a new revision. We do have support for settings that only apply to those deployment slots, and it's similar over in the Azure Container Revisions side. And as far as the number that you can have, well, in the app service plans, we can either have 5 deployment slots or 20 deployment slots, depending on the SKU that we've chosen. Where Azure Container Apps, it's all about the revisions, and we can have up to 100 inactive revisions. But hopefully that should be plenty. When it comes to scaling out, there are some similarities as well. So we have options for automatic scaling, and we have manual scaling options. It will also automatically remove unhealthy apps in both scenarios as well, if we've got multiple apps running. But the scaling options are subtly different. So on an app service plan, we can scale just automatically, let it scale itself, or we can do it based on Azure metrics. However, Azure Container Apps are based on cadence scaling, similar to what you might be using inside Kubernetes. Kubernetes will give you more options, and here one of the things about Azure Container Apps, it's quite opinionated, so it's using cadence scaling. But the fact it's using cadence scaling means that we have over 50 scalars to pick from, in addition to the HTTP and TCP scaling options. So we're not just constrained by the Azure metrics, so a lot more options around auto scaling. We will scale the number of instances on an app service plan, where on the Azure Container Apps, we're actually scaling out the number of replicas, and we're scaling that out on a per application basis. So on the app service plan, we have to scale the whole app service plan. On the Azure Container App, we can scale each application inside that environment. It will also scale all the way down to 0 as well, if you let it, if you have that as settings. Where in an app service plan, you can't scale to 0, and even when you stop all of the different, when you stop the app service plan, you'll still continue to be charged for it. So, yeah, quite a few similarities between app service plans and Azure Container Apps, but also a lot of similarities between Azure Container Apps and Kubernetes. So it kind of sits somewhere in the middle, and it's a really nice PaaS offering that gives you a low maintenance, no need to patch it, for example, and loads of Kubernetes options, but without the complexity. The next one I wanted to talk about is container workloads on Azure Batch. We won't go into too much detail in these. They are an older option, but they really sit on top of Azure VMs. But something that you might not know is that we can actually run containers on them. So the way they work is that you have your compute, which is a pool, and that is actually a VM scale set. And inside that, we have worker nodes. And the way these are designed is that for custom applications, we can break up individual tasks and then distribute them out into different worker nodes. And we can have the worker nodes are what scale out. So these have a wide range of file support. So we can attach to Azure files, blobs, and various other bits. And they're really designed for large workloads. Examples of that might be something like a rendering farm. So say you've got a 3D animation and you want to render it. You can break up the individual frames that you need to render, put it onto workloads for Azure Batch, and it will distribute it out onto each of those workers. But there is limited support in the portal. This is really designed for custom implementations and custom solutions. So you would use this, as I say, if you were taking a render job and splitting it up and sharing it. Well, you need to do that from the application that is managing the rendering. But it's also used for HPC as well, where we can split. This is the high performance compute, where we can split tasks across a large number of servers. Like the other services I've mentioned so far, where we do have GPU support, it is recommended actually to move to Kubernetes now for GPU support, but it is still available. And the pricing model for this, because it's more of an orchestration, the actual batch service itself is free. What you're paying for is the underlying VM compute. So I want to talk about Kubernetes now. As I mentioned at the beginning, Kubernetes has quite a steep learning curve. And the way I look at it is that, in a way, Kubernetes is an ecosystem in its own right. So it's kind of a little bit like moving between cloud providers, because all the same things are there, but they all have different names and work in subtly different ways. So, for example, our VM scale set is kind of referred to as a node pool, so on and so forth. So different terminology, but it's all there and it's just all managed in a slightly different way. Now, Azure's Kubernetes service will allow you to interact with Kubernetes, but back it all with standard Azure services, and we'll see that in a bit. Obviously, this is a relatively short presentation, so I'm not going to be diving into the details of Kubernetes. If it is new to you and it is of interest, I definitely recommend the illustrated guide to Kubernetes. It might seem quite comical to look at it this way, but it's a really good foundation for understanding the basic terminology, and then you can go away and build your learning on it. So, yeah, it's part of the cloud native computing foundation website, and there's a video on there, and it's about 15 minutes or so, and it's well worth a watch if you want to get a basic grasp of what Kubernetes is, if you've heard about it, but you're not quite sure about the terminology or where to even start. So what I'm going to do now is try and explain in simple terms what Kubernetes is in the context of this presentation, to try and compare it to the other services. So we have the Azure Kubernetes service. This in its own right doesn't have any compute. It is just going to manage what the Kubernetes cluster, which contains everything that is going to be running. It's inside this that we have one or more node pools, and it's the node pools that are the compute. So the equivalent of our app service plan or our Azure Container Instances group. So it's the node pool is the compute. And inside that, we then have our pods where we run our containers. And if we've got any sidecars, they will run alongside that container in the same pod. So what we've seen throughout all of these is that the actual compute model is very similar, no matter how you're running your container. There is a compute layer, and then your pod can either sit on its own inside that compute layer, or it can be, or it can sit alongside other pods, other containers on that same compute. So when we're looking at it, Kubernetes is really flexible system. It's tightly linked to the Azure infrastructure. So under the hood, it's doing a lot of the things that you'll be familiar with if you're using a VM-based solution in Azure. But it does have a really steep learning curve. And when we're talking about small clusters, so if you've got a Kubernetes cluster that's relatively small, just say with 1 or 2 apps on, there is an overhead to running a Kubernetes cluster. You don't have to, but if you've got Ingress, for example, and you put your Ingress inside that then runs in its own pod and is going to be using up your compute and various other bits and pieces. So that's a consideration. But I'd say the biggest drawback is that you are fully responsible for everything. That includes patching, and that needs the nodes to be patched. It needs the cluster to be patched, along with the underlying images and everything else. You also need to design the networking and how everything's going to talk to each other, what's public, what's private. You need to have a really good understanding of load balancers and all of the other infrastructure. So if you're in a dedicated infrastructure team and you have a large number of applications that you're working on, this can be a really good flexible option. However, if you're in a relatively small software engineering team, development team that just needs to host a relatively simple website, you'll quickly find that the learning curve and the maintenance overhead is significant, and it might not be right for what you need. And I think this is one of the challenges, and going back to that first slide where we talked about why people like start talking about Kubernetes and quickly get discouraged by it, is that it just really depends. And hopefully we've seen the other services can fill some of those gaps where you might not be ready for Kubernetes yet. So reflecting on that, the use cases are for large scale microservice-based solutions where we've got a dedicated team to manage it. But another use case is where we've got custom networking, custom networking, or we want particular virtual machines that back it with particular compute considerations, such as GPUs or certain processors and things like that. And then we've got the pricing model, just so that we can compare it. So the Kubernetes service itself does have a free mode that doesn't that is a little bit limited. There is a new automatic mode. Now, I haven't spent any real time with this myself, but from reading around, it's going to fill in some of those drawbacks, so some of the patching and things like that for you. But there is a standard mode as well, and along with a premium. And then on top of that, you're paying for your underlying infrastructure as well. So again, depending on your needs, the pricing model may or may not be competitive depending on what you're doing. So how do we go and create one of these? Well, it's a slightly more complicated process. We create our cluster first of all. So again, this can be done through Bicep, or it can be done through the portal or various other bits. But here we are creating it through the Azure CLI. We specify the resource group, the name. We are going to specify a node just to have some compute, and we're going to generate some keys as part of that. And we can see that quite quickly in Azure. Now, Azure has you can see everything that's going on inside your cluster in Azure, but a lot of people will use a different viewer to actually manage the cluster. There are lots of third-party tools for doing that. And what has that done in the background? Well, interestingly, it's created you another resource group. So not the resource group you specified to create the resources in, but a secondary one. And this has put all of the Azure infrastructure in. So you can see there that we have a network security group, initial identities, we have our load balancer, and we've got our VM scale set, which is the node pool. Now, these aren't here for you to make changes to. We make all of our changes to the Kubernetes cluster using Helm charts, and then it will update these. So if you change the load balancer between public and private, it will change it in this underlying infrastructure. But I just wanted to kind of show you that what AKS is giving you is it's Kubernetes, but it's backed by the standard Azure infrastructure that you're used to. But we interact through Helm, and this is the Helm that we're going to use to deploy just a simple Hello World app. Actually, no, sorry, it's a demo app here. So we specify our pod, we specify the container, we specify a port, and then we have the service which allows, it's our load balancing service, which will allow the traffic in to access this. So it's coming in on port 80, and we're going to redirect it to port 5000. These files can get very long and very complicated, but this is the most basic one that you can do. Once we have that file, we then need to apply it so we can connect to the cluster. And then once we've connected to the cluster, we can then use the kubectl command line to interact with it, including applying any Helm charts that we have and querying it. So you can see there, we can use kubectl to see what pods we have and what services we have. As I mentioned, you can see all of that inside Azure as well. And just to give you a bit more understanding, I mentioned before about there being an overhead to running a cluster. Well, this is a cluster running that one pod, so running that one container that I chose. But you can see there we've got the Nginx pod at the bottom, which is doing our load balancing, and then we've got all of these other system pods that are running on there as well. So if you've got a small cluster, it's got a lot of overhead, but they are there. You can see them, you can manage it, you can do all the networking and everything that you need to. This is a sample diagram from Microsoft, and just wanted to kind of show it to you to show you that even when we go with Kubernetes or any containerized solution, it's part of a bigger picture, and we often don't want to put, for example, persistence inside our cluster. So we put our SQL Server on the outside or a Cosmos DB on the outside. Some people will put persistence inside, but there are different schools of thoughts on that. We also can put load balancers outside of the Kubernetes cluster, and we've got other dependencies. It will hook into AD through standard RBAC, and it uses key vaults for secrets and various other bits and pieces. So it's part of a bigger picture. You don't have to go everything all in on one of these solutions. The final bit I wanted to mention was around Azure virtual machines. And these, of course, can host containers in the way they can pretty much host any other application on them. And they are still an option, and it might be one that you want to consider. Now, we've talked about Kubernetes quite a bit throughout this and compared it and various other bits and pieces, but there are other ways of managing large amounts of containers. And Docker Swarm is one such system, and people still use it, and there are reasons why you might want to use it. And that's an example where you might want to use VM scale sets and various other things to manage your own Docker Swarm inside Azure. You might also want to use it in scenarios where you're moving from an on-prem solution up into the cloud. Maybe you've got an on-prem Kubernetes cluster or something like that. You want to move that into the cloud. It might be a stepping stone to do so. It's not something I've done. I don't know if it's recommended, but it was just a thought about why you might want to use virtual machines. Obviously, if you are using virtual machines, you are completely on your own. So they can be complex. And just like the Kubernetes cluster, you're going to be managing the patching and the design and all of the other configurations. And the VMs are charged by the size of the machines and the duration. So just to kind of summarize that, we've had a look at Azure Container Instances, one of the early ways of running in containers, but still really valid. But the key thing is these don't scale. We looked at Azure Container Registry Tasks, not really a hosting option for containers, but a way of running a container should you want to just quickly run one with next to no setup. The specialist container support is really good if you've got a PaaS service and you just want to extend it just that little bit, or maybe even just dip your toe into containerization. App service plans are great for hosting websites, and they do now support containers. which is really good to see. But containers were added afterwards, and they are missing some of the more advanced features you have later. Probably the biggest drawback is the scaling and the fact that it's a struggle to have private apps on there. Azure Container Apps, kind of a newer service that kind of sit nicely between app service plans, but with a lot of the benefits of Kubernetes. And they are actually backed by Kubernetes under the hood. Then we have container workloads on Azure Batch, quite a specialist service, but important nevertheless if you are in a situation where you've got a job that you can split up programmatically and send to lots of workers. And then we have Kubernetes service, and finally finished off with containers on VMs, which is still a valid option and shouldn't be ruled out in your investigations. So very much a whistle-stop tour through Azure and all of the container options. We looked at some of the pros and cons there. During my research for this, I did gather a load of links. They are available there on that QR code should you be interested. And as I mentioned before, if you've got questions, happy to take them now, but you can also find me on the LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky, just with my name at John Killmister. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely sublime, John. There's nothing more can be said. Brilliant, awesome presentation. Really enjoyed that. It's it's one of those things. I think I'm gonna have to watch that every couple of months without fail, just to remind myself of the options. Because obviously even doing the job that I do, which is interacting with customers on a daily basis. Some of these things are just so not rememberable in that sense. Unless you're dealing with on a daily basis. So really enjoyed that. Thanks so much, John. I'm not sure there's a whole heap of questions in the chat, to be honest, either. I mean, Alan's asked around Kubernetes with open source software and a whole bunch of third parties. Is that really the case that you see with Kubernetes, John?
So there's a lot of folks around third party software to manage Kubernetes. Yes, unfortunately it is. I'd say the Azure interface for Kubernetes, it's added. It might at the moment where we are. I'm in the process of I'm helping teams move stuff to Kubernetes, so I'm not using it on a daily basis. But from what I've used of it so far over the last year or so, it is adequate in Azure. You can see what's going on just about, but if you are using it in a production environment, yes, a lot of teams will use third-party software. I can't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but yeah, to manage, monitor, and things. I'd say that there's probably some more work to be done on the Azure UI for looking at it. Also, I think it's worth saying that all of these are moving targets. So yeah, what I've shared today is what I know to be correct at this point. But all of them have, I think pretty much all of them have some features that are in preview, and they're continually being added to. Kubernetes, the AKS, the Azure Kubernetes service, is getting more features in order to make it simpler to use. At the same time, so if you're doing like patching, there's things like Fleet Manager, Kubernetes Fleet Manager, and things to help you with that, and the new automatic SKU. But also things like Azure Container Apps are getting more features, and even app service plans are getting more features around containers. So it's a continually moving target.
So I mean, he's done a great job to kind of bring us all up to speed now, John. Yeah, Carl video will be out hopefully tomorrow at some point. So yeah, like I say, it's really good. Really good session, John. I can't really say any more praise than that. I think goes for everybody on the call. So yeah, look, if everybody can show your appreciation if there are no more questions. Thanks again, John. Always great to have you on, of course. Cool.
You
Well,
could
on
add,
that note,
I was going to say, it was a good, superb talk, John. You could add Red Hat OpenShift to that as well as if you want another level of complexity on top of that.
That's the thing. There's so many options, isn't there?
I know, it's crazy. No, that was a really good, really good presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Right then, time for quiz. So stick around, everyone, because I'm just going to fire it up now. There we go. Let me move that one out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. See the chat. If everyone, you know the drill by now, you can follow the QR code or click on the link there, quizzer.co.uk, or type in the link there, and you'll know the format. Multiple choice questions, 4 possible answers, arranged like Xbox control buttons. Give everyone a few minutes to get in, and then we'll kick off. We've got the obligatory 3 Christmas-themed questions towards the end, although they're still technically Azure-based. What are we looking at today, John? About...
I think, yeah, we should have another few join in, but we're going to go for the first and second playing surprise.
Yeah, I think so.
We haven't got our packet ebooks this month, so who knows? It might come back next month, but for now, we'll stick with the Amazon vouchers.
Universally accepted at one place.
Yes. In fairness, you can buy everything from there.
You can buy pretty from there, yeah. Right. Get rid of that. That's better. 9. Anyone else? There's a couple of duplicate names. 10. Simon trying to enter twice. Anyone else? Anyone struggling trying to get in? Otherwise, we'll kick off. Three, 2, 1. Let's go. Which of the following Azure services cannot run container images? That I know of. I questioned myself on this one. I suspect there is some hidden way you can do it in there, but Azure Fabric is the answer. Most you getting that one right. What license do I need for Entra private access? Oh, I didn't know one of these license types existed. So, you know, and I've only worked there 5.5 years. Entra Suite, that split the audience a bit. Which OS is the global access client not available for? Now, I think this did get mentioned. Or at least the ones that are supported were mentioned. It's Linux, apparently. What's the name of the new Azure Functions plan that includes VNet support? And this was one of the ones that was announced at Ignite, or went GA around Ignite, which is quite exciting. So if you're using functions and however you're hosting the code, it's Flex Consumption. Wonderful name. This will be one. It's you who's paying attention. And John, you've got no excuse. What's the name of the new Microsoft UK CEO?
I actually sent him a message today, Matt. Can you believe
Nice. What were you complaining about?
No, we were there on all hands in 2KS, and they were all a stew. And we were all encouraged to send him a message, so he got about 600 emails. So yeah, it wasn't only me.
It's Mr. Darren Hardman. How old is Microsoft in 2025? And I will add, same as me. Almost to the same day.
21 isn't an answer.
No, your flattery will get you nowhere. Correct answer is 50. What's the new name for extending Azure to your own hardware? This was a name change at Ignite. And I'm particularly proud of Azure Ark of the Covenant. It's Azure Local. Which Azure service should he use to manage and analyze the vast amount of data generated by his elves? Synapse Analytics is the right answer. Everyone getting that one. Santa's Workshop needs to ensure high availability and disaster recovery for its critical applications. Which Azure service should Santa use to achieve this?
Can I borrow these questions for customer calls, Matt?
You can. These are GPT generated ones. Azure Site Recovery was the answer. Santa's elves need to automate their toy production line to meet the holiday rush. Which Azure service should they use to create and manage workflows? The prompt was something along the lines of multiple choice questions about Azure in a Christmas theme.
Good.
Correct answer is Azure Logic Apps. And I think that's the last one. So let's have a look. And our winner is, I'm assuming that's Mr. D.
Is that Mr. Bolt?
Yay, woo.
And right, who's AKS Automatic? Let me think.
That's me, John.
There we go. Who is going to be Alan? Cool. D, Alan, I think I've got your email addresses, so drop me in the chat anyway as a little nudge and a reminder. Congratulations. Amazon vouchers just in time for Christmas. Winging their way over to you now. What more do you want, eh? Thanks everybody for playing, and congrats on the
Unfortunately, in my
winners.
case, two
Say
new
again.
car ties.
You're echoing, Alan. Say again, sorry. Gone now. It's gone. Right, let's bring that.
Turn the echo off.
Oh,
hopefully two new car tires. Unfortunately.
Oh no, I don't think you're going to get two new car tires with a £25 voucher unless you're driving a small car. Maybe, I don't know. Last time I went for two new tires, it was like having another mortgage payment. So
yes, that's what it's roughly like.
So yeah, that's just in time for Christmas. That's usually when it all lands, anyway, isn't it, Alan?
Well,
so,
somebody's put a screw through the sidewall from somewhere, and I don't know where, but it's not repairable. So, and I need to get a match pair really, because the
and just when we were trying to end it on a nice positive high for Christmas, Alan.
Well, Santa came around with his sleigh before and collected for charity for the round table. So that was quite enjoyable.
Indeed. Right, let's bring this one to an end then. Look, huge thanks everybody for joining and sticking around for the quiz. Matt, love the quizzes always. They're there. I will actually be stealing those images now and sticking them in my team chat just for a laugh. Huge thanks to everybody for joining and watching. Even more of a thanks to our speakers, to Saj and John. As I say, it's a task to come and watch one of these sessions. If you're here just to kind of garner that information, it's another step to actually take your time and put together a really good coherent talk, as both of our speakers have done again for us tonight. So, huge thanks from everybody for that. John, Saj, pleasure having you on as always. Hopefully we'll get you both back in the new year at some stage. But for now, save the date. Our next event is going to be hopefully on the 15th of January. And until that time, if you're celebrating Christmas, have a wonderful season and a happy new year. And for now, have a nice one. That's all from us for the year, for the month, for the year. This is our last one of the year.
Till next time, everyone.
Yes. Happy holidays to all. See you all soon.